Awesome. Thank you so much. This is like one of my very favorite conferences, and I feel really fortunate that we were able to do it virtually this year. So thank you to everyone for inviting me like directly into your own living rooms. It's very cozy. Thank you. I'm going to introduce myself real fast, I guess. My name is Jamison Hampton. My friends call me Jamie, and we're all friends here. I'm coming to you live right here from Buffalo, New York, our hometown speaker. And this is the joke I make at every conference. Buffalo, New York, the home of bad sports. That is less true right now than normal. Josh Allen is the GOAT, and also the Buffalo Blue Jays, very exciting. A joke I've made at other conferences and nobody understands, so I appreciate all of you. I am representing TrueLink Financial. That's the company I work for. We are hiring, so there's some posts on the job boards about it. Feel free to chat with me if you're interested. And also Greater Than Code is the podcast I'm on. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. I think we're pretty cool. We talk about like the human side of tech stuff. And you can find me at Jamie Bash on Twitter. Follow me, send me pictures of your cats, anything like that. Just if you're going to tweet about me, feel free to tweet about my talk, but I do use they pronouns, so please keep that in mind if you're going to say anything about me publicly. But I'm going to talk about remote work. And so this is a graphic from the 2019 Stack Overflow Developer Survey. I think it will be really interesting to see the 2020 Stack Overflow Developer Survey and how these numbers have changed. But even in, I guess, the before times, there were a lot of people in tech that were working remote at least part of the time. You can see that 12% of people were already full-time remote. Additionally, in the 2017 survey, they asked a question about what are your top priorities when you're looking for a new job? And 53% of people in 2017 said that remote options were one of their top priorities. So obviously this is something that is and already has been on everybody's mind. I personally have been working remote for my entire career in tech, about 7 years. I've been working like 80 to 100% remote. And when I tell people that, I usually have a conversation that goes something like this. And I know from my experience working with a lot of other remote people that these kind of responses are like annoying to a lot of people. And I kind of get that because people who have never worked remote have a tendency to sometimes act like it's like a walk in the park or not like a real job, but it is a real job. And you still have to get just as much work done. In fact, I feel like more guilty about taking breaks and stuff when I'm at home, because when you're in an office, like water cooler chat or whatever is a thing that happens naturally. And so it can be really isolating not having that kind of chat. This is a excerpt from a comic from the Oatmeal, but I kind of relate to it a lot. But overall, my responses are more like this. Because I really love working remote. It really works for me and it helps me do my best work. So this talk is kind of about like why that is. So I'm going to talk about the benefits of remote work first, like in general, for anybody who might have a chance to work remote. You get a lot of flexibility. You know, maybe you want to start a little bit earlier or later. That's usually fine. Maybe you have things that you have to do during the day, like pick up your kid from daycare at like a specific time. That's usually fine. Not having to commute is also like a big flexibility thing. This is a big one for me. I mean, a lot of us live in Buffalo, so you probably know that A, our public transportation system is like not great, and B, you have to dig out your car for like 4 months of the year. So I don't have to do those things, which is really nice. It gives you this freedom to work from anywhere. This is a little bit less right now, obviously, but normally I would be traveling a lot and I do a lot of conferences. I like to go visit my family. So like if I go to visit my family for a week in Texas, you know, I can work during the day as if I'm at home, just normal, and then hang out with my family at night. Don't have to take off time from work to do that. Your mileage may vary with this one, I think. Some people find it really distracting to work from home because there's like the dishes, the laundry, etc. Obviously, this one's kind of out the window right now with the whole situation that we're in. I'll go into that a little bit more later. But personally, I find that I have a lot better productivity at home where there's not like people walking by my desks, talking to me, asking me things. Like I really have a chance to like sit heads down and like work on my work. And I really like that. Plus, just being able to work from a space where you feel comfortable is like pretty big. I don't want to understate that either. So again, this list was things in general, but I think the word benefits is kind of interesting because it means a few different things. I read a whole bunch of definitions of the word benefits. I liked this one. The word advantageous came up in a lot of them also. But I think it kind of means two different things in a way, because there's benefits that are nice to have, you know, they make your life a little bit better. But there are people for whom remote work is more than just a little bit of an extra convenience. And I think benefits, when you talk about like your health benefits from work, can also refer to like things you need that make it possible to do something you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. So while it's cool to think about what benefits you want to give people, I think it can be more helpful to think about like what problem or barrier you can help people solve. Because what benefits are like really valuable to people can be different for different like demographics of people. So, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about, we talk about D&I a lot in our industry, and I'm sure that you've all thought and talked about this before, but just briefly, like there are reasons that you want to have a diverse team, and not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is. I think that should be reason enough, but actually it will also like benefit you and make your team stronger for a couple different reasons. We're not actually great at anticipating the needs for people who have very different needs than us. I do a talk about user empathy that kind of is predicated on that. So having a lot of people on your team who have different needs themselves spreads that out and makes you much better at anticipating problems. An anecdote I like to tell for this one is, I read about this a while ago. There was a team that was working on hand dryers, like those automatic hand dryers in the bathroom, you put your hands under, they turn on. And they went to production with these hand dryers, and then when they were out in the wild, they realized that like they didn't really work for Black people because they couldn't really see Black skin in the same way. And so that was really embarrassing for that team, not only because like their product doesn't work and it's awful, but like it's also very obvious that they didn't have any Black people working with them at any point, because even one person would have noticed this and brought it up. Also, in general, the tech industry has a diversity problem. There's a lot of teams that just want to hire, you know, someone who's like everyone else on the team. And so not only does that mean that they're not going to have those different perspectives, like I was just talking about, but they're also not getting the best candidates because they're only considering like a narrow segment of the population. And there's lots of talented people who unfortunately are like having trouble finding work, and they could be great additions to your team. Also, again, we talk about D&I a lot, and they mean different things. Diversity is about having a team that doesn't all look the same as each other, but inclusion is about making those people feel integrated. This graphic, actually, the arrows are pointing the wrong way, so I don't love that. But on the left, you have diversity, because there's different kinds of people, but on the right, you have inclusion, because they're all like integrated together. So if you have diversity without inclusion, that alienates underrepresented folks on your team, because it kind of indicates that you just want to look like you're doing a good job at this. And it's going to lead to less diversity overall, because underrepresented folks aren't going to want to stay at your company. But on the other hand, inclusion fuels diversity, because you're going to retain people, and you're also going to be attracting more diverse candidates, because it turns out that underrepresented people talk to each other and find out what companies are good at this and go to work for those companies. TrueLink is very good at this, and that's why I like working there, and I tell everyone. But I'm going to talk specifically about a few different demographics that I think can benefit from remote work for like specific ways. This slide has to be kind of general, because obviously there's like tons of different kinds of chronic illness and disability, and they all have different challenges and needs. That said, I will disclose that I personally have like pretty severe anxiety and panic disorder, and that's a big part of why I find working from home like very critical for me. It's really improved my life a lot, and so I'm also going to speak specifically to my experience with that. Again, like I said, different disabilities are going to need different accessibility accommodations. It's likely that the best ones are going to be at someone's own house where they're controlling all the variables. And this can mean like difficulty getting out at all. Before I was fully remote, I used to miss a ton of work. because there are times when I like wake up in the morning and I feel too bad to like really get out of bed. But I can still do work from my bed if I am allowed. In fact, sometimes working helps me as like a distraction with what's going on with me mentally. And then I was missing a lot less work and I was feeling better actually. And this is kind of about flexibility too. We talked about this, but some people have like a much more tangible need for the flexibility benefit. You know, if I have a panic attack early in the morning, I pretty much need to go back to sleep for a couple of hours to be useful for anything. So if I can just start a little bit later and then work a little bit later from home, that's like a whole day where I'm working that otherwise I would have had to call in. Also, if you have frequent doctor's appointments because of like a chronic illness, that requires a lot of flexibility too. Energy conservation. I like to talk about a thing called spoon theory. I actually have an entire talk about this also, but basically it's predicated on this idea that if you have chronic illness, you have to ration the amount of energy that you have in a day, and the spoons are like the unit of energy that you're spending on doing things. But like if you have to spend a lot of energy getting ready and commuting and doing all these things, you know, that's taking a lot out of you. And if you can cut all of that out, you're conserving a lot of energy that you can use for other things, to do a better job at your work and to do like other things you need to do in your life. Also, like lots of people who struggle with illness have good days and bad days, and you might not want people to see you on your bad days. For me, that means if I have a panic attack at home, like that sucks for me. But if I have a panic attack at work, it's really awful and it's embarrassing that I like people kind of witnessed me in that state. So being able to be at home and maybe turn off your video if you have to can preserve a lot of privacy. This is also kind of general because I'm talking about pretty wide categories, although I'll hone in a little bit after. But I actually think spoon theory works again here. It's less commonly talked about in this vein than for illness. It was originally a metaphor specifically for illness. But underrepresented folks do have to use more energy at work for like specific reasons. Code switching is one. What we talk about bringing your whole self to work a lot. I think that's really nice in theory, and I strive for it. But most people don't actually do that anyway, because of course the way you talk to your coworkers is different than the way you talk to your friends, like naturally. And that's more true if you're not part of like a majority in group. This might mean that like the slang that you would use with your friends who are from your same ethnic background is like different. For me, the way I talk around a group where everyone is queer is like very different. And so there's an energy cost associated with like making that determination of how you should communicate. Microaggressions is a huge topic. I could talk for hours. I won't, obviously. But what I mean by this is like small, indirect, often unintentional discriminations that happen against minority groups. And this definitely happens in the office. This might be things like off-color jokes, making assumptions about people. For me, getting misgendered is like people making an assumption about me that is like hurtful, even if someone's not doing it on purpose. It's small, but it adds up over time and it takes energy to kind of deal with. This is also kind of related, but like feeling like you fit in is like a pretty big feeling. Someone at a conference once told me a story about, he worked at like a series of jobs where he was the only Latino there, and he felt like none of his coworkers really understood him. And then he got a job at a place where everyone was remote and spread out like all over the world. And for the first time, he felt like, oh, I don't stick out here because everyone is different from each other and bringing different perspectives. And like that was like a really good feeling. I think that's a cool story. Also, like it can be expensive to go to work, actually. Like think about someone from an underprivileged background who just did a boot camp and they're looking for their first job in tech. Maybe they can't afford a nice wardrobe yet to go to the office. Maybe everyone is going out to lunch together and they want to like get to know people, but they can't afford to go out to lunch. Even transportation to get to and from work can be a problem for folks. Which kind of leads me to location-based diversity, which I don't think people talk about enough, and I think it's really important because like people who come from different places or live in different places or have different backgrounds have those different perspectives that's going to make your team like more thoughtful. And not everyone has the resources to live in major urban areas where a lot of tech companies are. because it's super expensive to live in like New York City or San Francisco, and not everybody can afford it. Maybe some people have family obligations and it's important to them to like be close to their family to take care of them. This might be more true in people from like other cultures too that put more of a priority on that kind of thing. Maybe you have someone from another country who wants to work, but they can't get a visa to work in the States. Having someone from another country is like awesome to have on your team for lots of reasons, but it can be like really tough from like the point of view of just like making it happen, I guess. These are all issues that can affect lots of different people, but they might disproportionately affect people from underrepresented backgrounds because of coming from different cultures or different places or being from like underprivileged backgrounds. I also want to focus specifically on the trans community because I'm trans. Talk about what you know. It's important to me. There's a lot of trans people that work in tech, and it's growing, which means the likelihood that you are already or will be working with like trans people on your team is also growing. And so understanding their perspective will help you like be a good coworker. I also think that the reason that there's so many trans people coming to tech is because remote work isn't possible in all industries. And there are reasons why remote jobs can be like uniquely attractive to trans people. So what are those reasons? Transitioning is really hard in general. It's just a huge change in one's life. It's a change for the better, but any period of intense change is very hard. You also have to worry about if people are going to be respectful of you. Even if you're in a good situation where like everyone at your job wants to be respectful of you, which unfortunately isn't always the case, but even then there's still unique challenges. A lot of trans people have a baggage about their wardrobe, and that can make it hard to kind of navigate a world where you're trying to do business casual or whatever. A lot of people also have to essentially replace their entire wardrobe when they first come out, which is tough to do all at once and expensive and kind of happens over time. So newly out trans people often like don't actually have a ton of appropriate clothes. It's hard to express how stressful it is to use the bathroom when you're trans. You might have some of an idea because of like, you know, you'll see in the news about like bathroom laws and stuff. I'm going to recommend another talk that goes into all of this kind of stuff like much more granularly. But for now, like just let me use my own gender neutral bathroom in my own home. The existential horror of being perceived in my physical form. You know, as if just feeling self-conscious about your appearance isn't bad enough. Transitioning often comes with like awkward teenage phases where it can be uncomfortable to be seen every day, especially if you're on hormones, which like not all, but a lot of trans people are. It can be a relief to just be able to turn off your video one day. It also helps keep your transition private, and that's like super important to a lot of people to kind of just be able to emerge from a cocoon different, and that's totally valid. Also, even well-meaning coworkers are sometimes going to mess up on names and pronouns. It's much easier to practice and get it right over text-based communication because you have like a second to be thoughtful about it and catch yourself. At my old company, everyone was like totally respectful of me and really supportive and always got my pronouns right on Slack. But then when we had in-person meetups, people slipped up a lot and they weren't trying to be jerks, but it made it like really stressful for me when I should have been enjoying hanging out with my coworkers. Also, correcting people is really anxiety inducing. It's way easier to do that over text than having to like actually speak up. Again, not all trans people have surgeries, but many people do. I did a couple years ago, and I was worried about having enough sick time, but I ended up being able to take off less time than I thought because I didn't feel up to like going around, but I could work from my bed. And also people didn't have to perceive my physical form while I was recovering, which was also a nice side effect. So we've talked a lot about the benefits, but there are also like cons of remote work too. There's already a lot of articles and talks that go into like all of the challenges and like tips for working remotely effectively. Now that we're in the situation where everyone is kind of working remote, the market is flooded with them, which is nice because it's nice that people who are already good at remote work want to support people who are brand new to it. But actually the phrase already good at remote work is kind of like key to what I'm getting into here, which is the idea that there's like a remote mindset. Because remote work isn't always easy. It takes work and it doesn't come naturally to everybody. But it's a skill that you can practice and get better at over time. A healthy remote environment doesn't just happen. It's something that you have to decide that you want, be intentional about, and like purposefully foster. So how do you do that? I have some tips. I think text-based communication is like a really big part of it. Not all communication for remote workers is over text. Obviously, we're on Zoom calls and stuff, but a lot of it is. So this will have tips that I think could be helpful for everybody, but like particularly for people like myself who like struggle with mental illness. So these are good things about text-based communication. One of my anxiety symptoms is memory lapse. So it's really, really helpful to be able to go back later and review exactly what people said and like the context around it. Being put on the spot with questions is also anxiety inducing. Async culture helps a lot with that. But even if someone needs an answer right now and not later, I still get a second to like think about how I'm going to word it, which is helpful for me. But there are a lot of cons too. My anxiety makes me worry a lot about tone, which is tough over text. I spend a lot of time reading into people's words. So I think that like erring on the side of over communicating can be really helpful. If you text me after hours, like tell me explicitly if it's urgent or non-urgent. People get really weird about clarifying tone, but it can be helpful even if it's like a little bit awkward sometimes. I also think emojis help a lot, which sounds silly, but you can really express a lot of nuance with emojis. My old company had an emoji on Slack that we made custom that said WYC, which stands for when you can. This is actually something that my dad and I invented when I was in like high school, because he would like text me and be like, call me. And I would freak out, like, why, what happened, what's wrong? And then I would call him all in like a tizzy about it, and he would just want to tell me like a funny story. So we invented when you can as like an indicator of like, I want to talk to you, but like it's not urgent and it's not bad. And it was helpful at work too, actually. Everyone liked that, I think. And that's really about context. The worst possible thing for my anxiety at work is like, can you hop on a call right now? Because then I'm like, why, what happened? Is it urgent? What's it about? Did I get in trouble? Did someone get fired? Am I getting fired? So I have like 1,000 ways that I'm reading into that. It takes a few more seconds to say something like, hey, can you hop on a call right now? It's time sensitive, but it's not an emergency, and it's relating to X project. That cuts out like lots and lots of anxiety on my end. You're already doing the first step to becoming a good advocate just by like listening to me talk about this. Getting a sense of some of these perspectives that I've been trying to cover here is like a big first step. But I do have some actionable tips for this also. If some people are remote and others aren't, and they're in an office together, that can be like a tough situation for remote folks because they're missing out on conversations that happen in person. Sometimes that means socially they're just not getting to know people as well, but that might cause them to get passed over for opportunities because people don't think of them first. Sometimes people even get left out of conversations that are relevant to projects that they're working on, which is really tough because it makes it hard to work efficiently on that project and have your voice heard. These are all things that underrepresented folks may already struggle with. And remote work, if done wrong, can like absolutely make them worse. So in my head, ideally everyone on a team would be remote. But even if not, you can still like push for this remote first culture in the way that people think about it. And there's like little ways you can do that. If you notice someone being left out of a conversation you think they should be in, like say something about it. I'm not necessarily saying that it's malicious. Like maybe two people meet in the hall and they just start talking about, work. That's a thing that happens. But you could say, oh, wait, actually, like Jamie's involved in this project. We should really include them on this too. Why don't we wait and have this conversation when we can loop them in? This is a really big one for me because I hate being on a call where there's like a bunch of people in a room together and then only a couple of people have called in. As the person who's remote in that situation, it's absolutely impossible to keep up with the conversation because there's lag, there's other noise in the room, you don't really have time to speak up. It's like, it makes me feel so left out. It literally makes me feel more left out than just not inviting me at all. So at my old company, we thought about this a lot and I really pushed for this. And eventually we started making everybody phone in individually, even everyone who's at the office. So everyone would get out like their headphones and it would be that, you know, Zoom call with everybody's faces that we're so used to now, even though a bunch of those people were near each other. And that was great. It made me feel like I was on an equal playing field with everyone else on the team, and I had like a chance to communicate with like just the same as everybody else. It made a huge difference, actually. Again, I could not possibly cover all microaggressions. I could do a whole talk on microaggressions. I still wouldn't cover them all. But in general, a good way to support underrepresented folks in your workplace is to like get better at identifying microaggressions so that you can A, not do them, and B, stop other people or say something when they do them. So here are a couple that are like relevant specifically to some of the things that I've already talked about in this talk. Don't comment on people's appearance on video calls. I don't mean like, you know, oh, I like your new haircut. I mean like, you know, maybe someone's looking under the weather today. Maybe they have some awkward acne. Maybe they're wearing their pajamas. There's no reason to comment on any of those things. It will only make people uncomfortable. It costs $0 to just not say anything about it. And let people keep their video off, at least sometimes. A lot of places push for everyone having their video on during calls. I actually get that. I think there is a lot of value in that. It fosters more of a relationship between coworkers, and that can be one of the challenging things about remote. That said, if someone has to keep their video off sometimes, there's probably a reason. So please just let them do it and not make them feel weird about it. Correct pronouns are not just for when you're physically with someone. This is actually like a big source of anxiety for me when I know that there are like people together in an office and I'm remote. I worry a lot about like if I'm being misgendered when I'm not there and I don't even know. Just don't let that happen. It's disrespectful. And it's also bad practice for when you are with someone. It like makes it more likely that you're gonna slip up in front of them and make them feel bad. I do want to put a caveat on this one. This is a little bit of a your mileage may vary. Not all trans people feel comfortable with other people correcting for them. So you should probably like ask them if this is something that they'd like you to do first. But a lot of people do really appreciate this. This is like a huge thing for me that I really appreciate when people do. So I wrote this talk before the pandemic kind of started. And then I gave it for the first time after. My topic became suddenly very topical, which is strange. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't kind of talk about it in this context a little bit too. Lots of people are working from home for the first time right now. And to those people, I say welcome. In some ways, this is like a pretty big revolution. There have been a lot of people who have been trying to advocate about all of the reasons that remote work could help them that I've been talking about now. And a lot of companies were telling people like, well, we can't. And I think that it's kind of a Pandora's box that's been opened. It's going to be hard to put back in the box because we obviously can. And we're building infrastructure to get better at it. And I think for people that would really like to work remote, it's going to be very hard to tell them like, well, now, you know, it's done and we're coming back to the office. You can't do that anymore. On the other hand, you have a lot of people who are working from home for the first time and being like, oh my God, this sucks. Of course it sucks because suddenly working remote during COVID-19 is not a healthy remote environment, and we didn't have time to foster a healthy remote environment. This really isn't what remote work normally looks like. You're not normally under the stress of living through like a global pandemic and like the collapse of democracy and all of these things that we're dealing with right now. You're not normally stuck in your house all the time with like your spouse who's also working remote and like your kids that are distance learning and can't go to school. So there's a lot of distractions. And it makes things tough, and good companies will understand that. But like, I'm worried about the idea of people who have never worked remote before being like, oh yeah, I tried that during the pandemic and it was awful, without kind of realizing that this isn't like the standard situation. And it makes me wonder what like remote work is going to look like in the future. it's actually really hard to speculate about the future right now, since gosh dang it, we just don't know what the world is going to be like in a few months. I gave this talk for the first time in like April, and I said that, and I was right. I had no idea that the world was going to be like this now, and it's true going into the future. That said, I think that like while we're in a really tough situation right now, we can let it change the landscape in ways that are exciting and will help people long term if we like take the steps to integrate remote work as a more standard part of our lives and like build out more infrastructure around it and get better at it. Ultimately, I think that's kind of a silver lining in an otherwise really bad situation, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out, I guess. I will post these on Twitter and in Hopin or whatever, but just a couple of other talks that I want to recommend, some that I mentioned. I mentioned my Spoon Theory talk, that's from RailsConf 2017. Things I wish I knew before going remote is a talk by Marla Zasheen. It was part of RailsConf 2019. As I said, there's lots of good talks about like the challenges of remote work, but I happen to like this one. Trans Eye for the Cis Ally, also from RailsConf 2019. I mentioned this one on the trans slide. My friend Julian Fitzpatrick, who's amazing, does this talk, and it kind of really goes into a lot of like if you are wanting to support trans coworkers, it could be really helpful. Thank you so much for listening. I think this is a really important topic. I'm always really grateful when I'm given the space to talk about it. I think it's really great that even when we're not doing in-person events, we can still feel connected to each other in this way. So reach out to me on Twitter or anywhere. Let's have some human connection. My website, jamiebash.com. Actually, the .gay domain, top-level domain, went live like 1 week ago. So obviously, I immediately had this redirect to my website. So jamie.gay is my new website. But thank you so much for coming and listening and all the other talks. I'm so excited.